Welcome back to the dojo, my people. Alright, so where we left off, we had created our Bifrost graph network. We adjusted it, we assigned a shader, we created an HDRI sky dome light, and we gave ourselves a nice little render. Now, that's all well and good, and if this is what we want to end up with, then, well, we've achieved our purpose. However, I want to show you guys in this tutorial how we can go about animating this scene. And there's a lot of things we can animate. This is really where we get the chance to truly experiment with the graph network. So I'm going to draw out here. For those of you who care, we'll get a 16-year-old Weller bourbon right here and a Esteli Norteño cigar. Whenever I'm in the studio, I treat it like a ritual. This is my happy place. It's my church, and I have to have my sacraments while I'm here. So the reason I'm zooming in right here is this input node. These input nodes are really important. The input nodes are going to allow us to keyframe anything that we want. So we've got this curl noise field. Let's zoom out here. I'm going to put this sort of mid-frame. Let's do one other thing. I'm going to select our sky dome light, and I'm going to come down here to viewport, and I'm going to set sky radius to 0. Now the reason I'm doing that is just so I don't have to see it in the background. It will still light the scene. It'll do all the things it's supposed to do. However, visually it won't be distracting me quite as much. Now the reason I'm doing this is if you notice, if we tweak time, now remember we've got a lot of, I probably should reduce this mesh torus if I want to be this cheeky. Well, let's do this. So if we tweak time here in the curl noise field, it changes the way our Bifrost graph network behaves. But you know what? I'm going to go to something a little bit more straightforward. And let's go into the field scope. So here in the vector field scope, the flow lines are displayed in 20-second segments. If I reduce this to 0, you'll notice that we have nothing. If I hit 5 seconds, we'll see a little bit more. 10 seconds, a little more, so on and so forth. So what I could do is I could animate the flow line length in segments to grow. I'm putting grow in air quotes here, to grow this graph network out from nothing to something. Well, it'll actually grow out from the torus, which is invisible, but from our torus to nothing. So just to make this a bit more sort of tutorial friendly, let's go back to our create mesh torus, and I'm going to reduce our major segments back down to, instead of 5,000, let's go to 500. And that's so that I can adjust the values here in the vector field scope a little more dynamically so that you guys can see them kind of in real time. And keep in mind that, we don't have to do that. I can keep these values really high. However, because I'm doing a tutorial, I don't want to pause it, and we don't want to sit around a long time waiting for things to happen. Now, how do I keyframe any one of these aspects? Well, the easiest way is to take an input node. One already exists as soon as we make our graph network. And I can make new ones simply by hitting tab and typing in input. And then I'll just create a new input node. And as you can see, I can have numerous input nodes. I can have infinite input nodes. Not a big deal there. What we're going to do, though, is here under flow line display, I'm going to open this plus sign, and it shows like display flow lines. Yes. Flow line length in seconds. Yes, please. And I'm going to run my input to flow line length in seconds. By so doing, I've now created a new keyable attribute that I can find here in my attribute editor for my Bifrost graph shape. So if I go in here and I hit my Bifrost graph, it pulls it up in my attribute editor. And if I look here under graph inputs, you can see that I now have an entry for flow line length in seconds. And let's keyframe this. So what we're going to do is here at frame 0, I might have mentioned this, maybe you guys don't know, I do not like working from frame 0. I prefer to work from frame 1. So I'm changing it to frame 1 here. I'm changing it to frame 1 here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set, right click and set a key. We're going to set that to 0. And then let's move to say 120 frames and set our flow line length to 20. And again, because, follow my mouse here, because I have auto keying turned on, Autodesk sets the key automatically for me. Now if I rewind and hit play, you'll see that this network grows from this input that I created and that I keyframed here. Keep in mind, I can literally plug an input into almost any aspect of this network. This is a really cool ability to have because we can kind of grow something very organically and create a very compelling visual statement with these forms. And now, if I had kept the mesh torus at my 5,000 here, or 50,000, I'll just put it at 5,000. Give it a second to calculate. Once again, you can see that the density increases. Nonetheless, we're still growing it in the exact same manner. So what's wonderful about a node-based system like this is it allows us to experiment in a very sort of organic way and see what works and see how we'd like to play around. Now, once you've tried that out, I encourage you to try putting inputs into other areas of the graph. So let's say I decided, you know what, I'd like to maybe tweak or keyframe the scale of my scale field. So I'm just going to put an input node into there. And in so doing, you can see now that I get here in my Bifrost graph attribute editor under graph inputs, I now have a scale attribute that I can key. So once again, if I go back to frame 1, I can right click and set a key and say, you know what, at frame 1 I'd like these to be 10, 10, and 10. But at frame 120, and I'm just going to jump to the next keyframe, at frame 120, I'd like these to be, let's say, 20, 20, and 20. So let's give it a second there. Whoops. Shouldn't have clicked that. Let's right click, set key, and I'm going to set that to 20, 20, and 20. Taking a second because we are scaling this sucker up. That's alright though. We got time to wait. Hit enter. Whoop. 20. Enter. There we go. Alright, so now we've done this keying, and you can see that our inputs are influencing our flow line length in seconds and our scale field's actual scale. Now let's minimize this for a second. Let's rewind it and let's take a look at what happens. So not only are we increasing the flow line length in seconds over time, we're also increasing the actual scale of the curl noise field through the scale field node by keyframing those two things. Now once again, I can add an input into any of these aspects. Major, minor radius, major segments, so on and so forth. And a lot of experimentation just pays off where suddenly you're kind of like, you're figuring out things I've never even thought of. This is where creativity and a little bit of exploration will do you a lot of good and pays dividends in the end. Now if we were to stop it, say right now, let's give it a stop. I'm going to hit escape on my keyboard. It's a faster way of stopping things, by the way, than pressing the stop button. So let's just take a look real quick at our graph network. Now, put this so that maybe it makes a little more sense. Let's change our connection node style to corner lines so that you guys can see this maybe a little bit more easily. And you can see how I've now sort of laid this network out. And I'm going to leave that up there for a second. Let's full screen that, just so you guys can take a look and maybe copy that recipe, so to speak, and then change it for your own purposes. So you could pause it there if you wanted to. Let's minimize that. Whoops, minimize the whole damn thing. Let's not do that. But I've brought up the screen that I want to. Let's give it a render now. Let's take a look at what we've got now that we've changed camera angle. We've animated it. Yeah, all right. I'm liking that. Really geometric, same time kind of organic, really cool sort of thing. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. All right, let's bring that window back up. Let's stop that render. Let me bring my Maya window back up. Minimize that. So this is what we're left with. Once again, our graph network. Now, a couple other things I can keyframe. I can go in and keyframe, say, like strand size profile, all sorts of things. So if I wanted to, I could hit tab. Oops, let me plug in my keyboard here. Sorry, folks. Blimey, Jamie, come on, man. You know better. Oh, where's my plug? That's what happens when you get a studio full of plugs, kids. You get this shit show of just plugs everywhere, all different shapes and sizes. Got a lot of peripherals here that I'm powering. All right, there we go. Yup. Happy keyboard. All right, I'm going to hit the tab key. Input. And let's just put another input node in right here. And you know, in my strand size profile, I can change the factor or the profile shape here. So once again, I can run this into profile. And as you can see here, I now have a thing where I can set a key for profile. Or I could change this and say, you know what, let's move this to, we're just going to delete this, hit delete. We're going to plug it into factor instead. Oops. Not happy about that. Okay, so I apologize. I'm not sure why it's not happy. We'll figure that out in the end. Oop, there you are. Okay, you're back. I did something that really upset you. Let's see. How would I plug this? Personally, I'm kind of curious as to like how I could change this profile shape over time. Maybe we can't do it right now, and that's okay. But I would really like to be able to do it. You know, we got these profiles here. Oh, I know how. All right, this will be for another tutorial. However, I know that we can write some VEX, V-E-X, or some Python code that would allow us to do a mathematical change of this profile shape over time. It's probably outside of the purview of this. One reason I'm not terribly good at writing either code, and I actually generally use something like ChatGPT to help me write that code, but it will be possible. So that's something we might tackle in the future. Nonetheless, we can set these inputs to almost everything else. So I guess I was a little too ambitious in telling you guys like we can put it to anything. Well, we're going to put it into, let's say this last one. If we go into like flow line samples per second, you know, if we increase this number, it changes things a bit. This one, by the way, honestly, I wouldn't keyframe. This is a sample that is of rapidly diminishing returns. As you can see, I changed it to 81. The difference between 81 and 24. 24 is a good place to start. The difference is very small. Nonetheless, the calculation sorry about that. The calculation inside of the program is very large, and so it's just not a great place to put a keyframe. However, if we wanted to change any of these other things, we certainly could. So one of the ways we can tweak all of this stuff is, if I wanted to come into the curl noise field over here, I could take my input it into, let's say, time or seed, and I could, hold on, something funky's happening here. Give me a second. Let's delete that. Let's delete this input, and let's create a new input. I don't know why that would be what it is, but I did something to that input that made it unhappy. And you can see now that we have a time for our input. And so again, I can set myself back to frame 0, right click up here, set a key, and then get to frame 120. This is where I'm setting all of my keys, but you could set them anywhere in the interstitial space here. And let's say I'm setting my time to 2.0 here. And let's right click. Well, it should auto set that key, right? And so again, if I rewind and play, you'll see that our network builds itself based on the animated input of all of these nodes that we have custom sort of keyed for this image. Now, I know that's a lot of information, and the reality is this comes down to experimentation. And I'm really happy that you're here, because it means you're sort of curious about this. And it also means that you'll probably start to try to plug things in all sorts of different places. Things will go wrong, things will go right, there'll be happy accidents, there'll be tragedies. That in itself is part of the artistic process, part of the creative process. When we're using technology, it's finding ways to manipulate it in a manner that the engineers never thought of, or in a manner that I never thought of. And I love learning new things from students. So I encourage you to go into the Bifrost graph editor here, and don't be shy about saying, well, what happens if I try to keyframe, hit an input node and keyframe this particular aspect of something? What would it do, right? What would happen if I did it here? What would happen if I did it here, or here, or here? The only thing that'll go wrong is, well, worst case scenario, I guess it'll crash. And to that end, we are going to save our file. I should have done this a little bit ago, to be honest. So let's save early, save often. And just experiment around as much as you can with this. In our next tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to create these networks using points and geometry, and not just something as simple as strands. And then we'll talk about a more custom shading that we can do for these networks here in the Bifrost graph editor. Alright, so I hope that's been helpful to you guys. In the end, hey, remember, drop kick that like button. Have a great night.